Today is Sunday. It's Sunday, all day long, as they say in some cultures. And we're doing Tanya, Be'ezer Hashem Yisborach. Now, if you are on this Tanya journey with us, I think this is class 45, and we're holding Pei Gimel. That, I think, is a record. 45 classes, we're holding Pei Gimel. Now, part of the reason we've been dragging our feet has been because when we did Pei Gimel, I stopped. The reason I stopped is because Pei Gimel, which is one of the shortest prakim of the Tanya, is supposed to talk about the Esakay Chazanefesh, Chabad Chagas Nehim. In reality, it talks mostly about Chochma, Bina, and Das. The 6 midas or the 7 midas are what you would call in halacha ba'avla. The Alter Rebbe mentions them as part of his discussion, but he doesn't really dedicate time directly to each one of the midas separately. So what we undertook to do was to talk over all of the midas. In other words, what we've been doing here is we have been talking into the Tanya what's written in Igeres HaKedesh Tezvav. The Alter Rebbe has a letter in the back of the book. The 15th Igeres HaKedesh, where the Alter Rebbe goes through each one of the 7 midas. Chesed, Gevura, Teferes, Netzach, Choy, Yossi, and Malchus. And by the way that Igeres HaKedesh works, first he talks about the 7 midas. Chesed, Gevura, Teferes, Netzach, Choy, Yossi, Malchus. And then at the end of the Igeres HaKedesh, he goes back to talk about Chochma, Bina, Vadas. It's very interesting. So, since Pei Gimel is dedicated to the 10 koiches, and the Alter Rebbe L'Cha'eda doesn't discuss them oisfirlich comprehensively, so we did it. I think we've done 4 or 5 classes where I explained to you Chagas, I explained to you Nehi, and I explained to you the advantage of Nehi over Chagas. And last Sunday we did Malchus, which means we finished. We did all Asekoiches. We still have to go back and do Das, which we're going to do inside, because Das, the Alter Rebbe actually explains. But I explained to you the right, left, and center of Chagas, the right, left, and center of the He, and how Malchus is a backwards Midah. Why is Malchus a backwards Midah? Because Malchus is a Midah that the further you are away, the stronger the emotion is. The way Malchus as an emotion works, at the higher a Melech is removed. His relationship is based on distance. The more distant he is from the subjects, the more of a king he is. Ein Melech beloy am bereiv am hadras Melech. The king becomes greater when he has more citizens, and the more citizens he has, the more they raise him. So his Malchus becomes more distant, and his Malchus becomes stronger. So we talk about all of the midas. But there's one more thing I want to say about Malchus, which I believe I did not say last week, and I would like to sort of say this as a conclusion of this whole discussion on midas, and that is the following. We already discussed the idea of chosim hamishapech. Chosim hamishapech is an expression, I'm going to assume it's written in Kabbalah Sfarim, although I'm not a Makubal. Chosim hamishapech means that the inverse seal, that's what it means. In the language of Chassidus, chosim hamishapech is called Kol ha-gavoya, gavoya b'yoser, yoyred lamata, mata b'yoser. Whatever has a higher source falls lower. What does chosim hamishapech mean? If you have a ring that has a protruding stamp, and you press it into wax, whatever is the furthest from the ring on the surface of the ring will be the deepest indentation in the wax. Whatever is higher, when you impress it on something else, comes out lower. And the nimshal is Chabad is higher than Chagas. Chagas is higher than Nehi. But in its shadish, in its root, it's the other way around. Chabad is lower than Chagas, and Chagas is lower than Nehi. And I explained to you how, and I explained to you why. Because Nehi are simple emotions, right? Nehi is fight, be stubborn, connect. In psychology, they would call the emotions of Nehi instinct, reflex, or fight or flee, right? When you meet an enemy, you're in the middle of a field, and the enemy is bigger and stronger. You have a split second to decide whether you're going to stand and fight, or you're going to dash off and run away. And you have no time to calculate. And it's very, very instinctual. It's very, in the Lashon HaChasidus, atzmiistic. So on this basis, Nehi is deeper than Chagas, and Chagas is deeper than Nehi. It's brought in the Maimonides. And of course, the place where we know this from is from the Maimer Bossi Lagani, where the Rebbe talks about Midas HaNetzach, the Friedrich Rebbe, and the Rebbe, of course, discusses it at length. Midas HaNetzach, that when you find yourself in a situation where you're fighting a Mulchama, which is called the Melchemes Nitzachin, a war that you must win. Losing is not a possibility, it's not an option. So when you have a Melchemes Nitzachin, you see the Midas HaNetzach of a king, and the previous Rebbe tries to explain it, that when a king shows Midas HaNetzach, there's no limits to the dedication, to the urgency of winning this war, including Mashlech Chayav Mineged, even paying with his life to win the war. These are all in parameters of Midas HaNetzach. And of course, one of the things which comes along with Midas HaNetzach, which is explained by Arichas Maya Basi Lagani, is something which is called Bizbuz Ha'oitzris. Remember that? The dispensation, the dispensing of the treasure that Leishosfu, that in the previous generations is Avesav Atzruhu was collected, it was hoarded by his ancestors, and no in many cases nobody has even laid eyes on them. And then when you find yourself in a moment of Melchemes Nitzachin where you cannot lose, the Eitzres, this treasure is brought out and it's dispensed of liberally, so long as the war can be won. This is the Moshe of Midas HaNetzach that brings out the idea that Nehi, even though it's lower, it's much less sophisticated than Chagas, it has a higher shader. Now, according to that logic, if it's true that Chabad is higher than Chagas, but Chagas has a higher source, if it's true that Chagas is higher than Nehi, but Chagas, Nehi has a higher source, and if you remember the simple physical example I gave you is from fingers and a fist. Fingers can do very fine things, but power and force is in a fist. Remember? According to that logic, you have to say that since Malchus is the lowest Sfira, Malchus has the highest source. Even higher than Nehi. Correct? If Malchus is the lowest Sfira, then Malchus has to have the highest source. And everybody knows the famous story, it's really a famous story, that when the Alter Rebbe was incarcerated, Alter Rebbe was in jail, the king asked through one of the Chachamim, when the Alter Rebbe arranges the Esser Sfiras, how come he puts Midas HaMalchus last? And of course, the Alter Rebbe didn't put Midas HaMalchus last. The Arizal put Midas HaMalchus last. And of course, the Arizal did put Midas HaMalchus last. The Zayar put the Midas HaMalchus last. And they say, it goes back to the beginning of time. Malchus the last of the 10 Sfiras. And the Alter Rebbe had to defend Hayitacha, and he's sitting in the palace of a king who runs a country, and Midas HaMalchus is the lowest Sfira. And I don't know how the Alter Rebbe addressed this question. But the answer about Midas HaNyanim is Malchus is the lowest. But Malchus has the highest shadish. Malchus has the highest source. Malchus is the deepest. In Chassidus, when you learn about Midas HaMalchus, you discover that Malchus goes till the deepest in Yonim and Atzmas and Hus. Malchus has a higher shadish than Eig. Malchus has a higher shadish than Shem. Malchus has a higher shadish than Rotzen. Malchus goes until Atzmas and Hus Mamish. It's the lowest of the 10 Sfiras, but its source is the highest. Okay? Now there's 2 points that I want to say in explaining this idea that Malchus has the highest shadish. The first has to do with Midas HaMalchus. The first has to do with Midas HaMalchus. In other words, the emotion of Malchus. What is the emotion of Malchus? The emotion of Malchus is an emotion of a relationship with another which is based on height, on distance. Right? You have Murgish and you have a Roimamus. Murgish means I feel you. But Murgish means I feel you because of what we have in common. And then there's a Reimamus. Reimamus also means I feel you. But Reimamus means I feel you because of what we don't have in common. Like I always tell you, the human nature is to compete. Human nature is to compete. It's a basic human condition that should be tachlis. And I heard that the Rebbe said that competition is necessary. The Rebbe was asked about the socialist system, the communist system. Yeah. The communist system, if you think about it, in theory is much better than the capitalist system. Why? Because the capitalist system is a selfish system. Everyone wants to make more money. I want to earn more. The communist system, everybody shares. Of course, the problem with the communist system is not the idea, it's just that it's totally impractical. If I'm going to work hard and you're going to work less hard, and we're going to both get the same amount of money, you understand yourself what's going to be the end. But in idea, in theory, in svara, in a perfect world, the communist system is a very kind system. Everybody works hard, then you divide, you split. Like the Israeli kibbutzim, you split all the profits. Everybody's equal. But then it's not practical. So I heard that the Rebbe was asked about the socialist idea. You know and I know, we all know, that mitnisibes, shenis, and mishunis, when the communist ideology was developed and created, one of their core principles was to fight against God. And if you think about it, it makes no sense whatsoever, because communism has nothing to do with God. Communism is an economic system. It's a system of how to run an economy, business. Communism is a political system. It's how to govern a country. It has nothing to do with religion. You could have had the very same communism who would have let everybody go to their own houses to worship and serve the Eibishter the way they want, and you could have exactly the same socialism. As Ken Gorzaini would have been more successful. Bemis, they wasted so much time and effort on the Difas Adas. Time and energy and effort that could have been invested to strengthen the ideologue, the shite of the economic redistribution of wealth, they call it, to make everybody even and let people do their own way. You want to believe in God? Believe in God. It's mamash a klipe. There's no hezber apiseich. So I heard that somebody once asked the Rebbe, in principle, in other words, not in Mitzias. In Mitzias, the capitalist system works. The capitalist system is based on a simple principle. Forgive me for saying this in the Vaibishul, the Beis Chayenu, yeah? The capitalist system is a chazer. That's the principle. Which means in Eidel we're all selfish. And you create an economy that uses the selfishness to serve everybody. How do you create an economy where you use yourself to serve everybody? That you will personally gain by creating more jobs, by creating more industry, by creating more opportunity for others. So the capitalist system is a selfish system. I want to get very rich, but in order for me to get very rich, I have to help you get rich, stam. Or I want to get very, very rich. So in order for me to get very, very rich, I have to help you become very rich. Otherwise, my selfishness is not going to be satisfied unless I help you satisfy your selfishness. That's the philosophy. Communism is built on a neutralization of that motivation. Take away from people the motivation to earn personal wealth, because it's going to be divided equally. So I heard that the Rebbe said that you cannot take competition away from people. Until Mashiach comes, it has a number, Mashiach is going to come, there's going to be no jealousy. The only jealousy is going to be after Mashiach comes is every person is going to be jealous of his own potential. Every person is going to know what they could be. Every person is going to know what they are, and they're going to aspire to go from where they are to where they should be. You're going to compete against your perfect self, your idealized self, your theoretical self. But until Mashiach comes, there must be tachlis, there must be competition. Competition motivates people. Azay is teva b'nei Yod. But who do you compete with? You compete with those who are equal with you. Nobody competes with insects or with animals. You compete with other human beings. Moreover, you compete with other human beings that, to use a psychological term, that threaten you. If a person is your age, he has your level of intelligence, and he's the same socioeconomic class, and maybe he's involved in the same industry you have a lot of reasons to be jealous and competitive of such a person. But if that person is a million miles higher than you, whether it's intelligence, or it's economy, or it's a social standing, or a million miles lower than you don't compete with such a person. Why? He's not he's not in your class. So competition has sort of a border, a parameter. And the parameter of competition is you compete with people that are close to you, they're in your world. This is called mitzad hamurgish. Most human emotions conform to this criteria. Most human emotions are about proximity. That means closeness. I love you. I judge you. I have compassion or joy for you. I fight with you. I'm stubbornly resistant to you. I allow myself to become emotionally attached to you because of proximity. What brings us together is our closeness. Because you and I are more or less in the same world, therefore there's a midas chesed. I feel your joy, I feel your pain, I feel your success, I feel your failure, and on and on and on and on. The exception is midas hamalchus. Because midas hamalchus is exactly the opposite. If all human emotion is about feeling close, midas hamalchus, the midah of reimus, the midah that we call in English, of being exalted, removed from others, is about distance. You feel malchus, the people with whom you don't compete at all. The people with whom you compete, you can't king over. It says in Chassidus, if the Eibush would create millions of neshamas of Atzilus, he would be a tatem, tasach kinder, he'd be a father with many sons, many children, but he wouldn't be a melech. When the Eibush has a rotz nana emlech, and it says in the beginning of Perek Zayit, the Alter Rebbe says that's why there has to be Yechudat Torah. That's what there has to be, a world called Bria, and a world called Yetzirah, and a world called Asiya, and a world called Asiya Gashmis, where you have Amilosh and Abimus, simple, prosta people, and over us, the Eibush, there would be a melech. And not Emlech, the Eibush has to be a king. Because Malchus is based on distance. The emotion of Malchus is not based on the fact that I feel you, but I feel removed from you. But there's a kvetch, there's a diak, as we discussed before. Malchus is an emotion where I feel removed from you, but I feel removed from you. In other words, I'm not so far removed from you that I have no relationship with you. I feel removed from you in the kind of way where I feel that I have a certain achrayis toward you. That's what a melech is. A melech is a person who's so much above his subjects, he feels responsible for them. Now why should you, if you are the richest person and the smartest person and the kindest person and the alamaylis, why should you care about a simple person? As they did teva, the Eibush created in his bria, teva hamerumam is nimshach al hashafel. That when you're in proximity with another, you feel them from kiruv, but you also compete, which makes any relationship subjective. But a melech is so far removed. But if a carrot, his removal makes him feel responsible for his subjects, but it's based on the distance, which is why a melech can be objective, completely objective, when it comes to his subject, because his emotional relationship doesn't have even a tinge of jealousy or competition, because the basis of the relationship is ich mit dir haben kein Scheiches in the mitten faith. We have nothing to do with one another whatsoever. I'm going to tell you Stama Maise, because it's a Maise that you have to hear, which I probably told it before. I know I told it before. It's a very interesting story. The Friedrich Rebbe used to fabrein when the Rebbe Rashab, B'chaim Yossi, B'almadein of the Rebbe Rashab. And people who were those fabrengens described those fabrengens. Friedrich Rebbe was the Mashminal Pale of Temchet Mimim. He was the principal, head of the issue. And he was a big nister. The Friedrich Rebbe, B'chaim and Ebner Fasedim acted like a businessman. A Mashgiach once called over a Bocher at the Moiz Geret. He criticized him for asking the Friedrich Rebbe, Pshat and Geborah, Tzien HaMaimer, you're embarrassing the Rebbe's son, the Verstehst. He was such a nister, the Poshet Torah can't learn, the Versteht in Geschäft, the Versteht in Askonis. So the Rebbe Rayat used to fabring. His fabrengens were only for the Elter Bocher. They were always exclusive. They were not for everybody. And the fabrengens were fire. Because it's a Rebbe, you understand? You're fabringing with a Rebbe, with a Yid whose whole Metzias is Avedis Hashem till Mitzi Nafshei Mamish, Metzias Nefesh, and he was sitting with Bochrim. So there was such a fabringen. And the Friedrich Rebbe hat sich stark mevatel gewesen. The Friedrich Rebbe started to speak about himself disparagingly. But when a Rebbe speaks about himself disparagingly, as the old Chassidish expression is given sakonas. You couldn't listen. It was so graphic. It was so bitter. It was so angry. It was so negative. It was hard to listen to. So finally, one of the Bocharim said to the Friedrich Rebbe, is that the Rebbe's a kind, you're the Rebbe's son. How much can you trash yourself? You're the Rebbe's son, the Rebbe Rashab's son. And the Friedrich Rebbe stops, and he says, Dorten haben mir den ganzen kein Scheiches nicht. No, do you want to mix in that I'm a Rebbe's son? You and I have nothing to do with each other. Finished. This relationship's over. You want to talk? Leave that out of the equation. You want to bring into the equation that Rebbe Sakin, he didn't only mean the fact that he genetically inherited genes or biology, that he was a Rebbe. He says, you want to mix in that I'm the son of the Rebbe, so there's no for bringing. Finished, no for bringing. It's a different thing. Because then the whole relationship is based on distance. This is Midas HaMalchus. What does Chassidus add to this whole description? Such a beautiful tziyah, yeah? What does Chassidus add to this whole description? What Chassidus adds to this whole description is that the nature of Midas HaMalchus, the nature of this emotion, which is called Meluch, which means that the relationship is based on distance. When you go to the shayrish of this midah, when you go to the very root, to the very, very beginning of this midah, it's Fayachal, in Atmos Amhus, the idea that the Eibishter is involved with another. Midas HaMalchus, in its essence, not just in its practicality, not in its reality, but in its essence, is an involvement with another. And when you understand the Eibishter, what do we understand about the Eibishter? Whatever Torah teaches us, which is very little, you understand that the Eibishter is Achtas Pshut. The Eibishter's Metzias says his existence is only himself. Hashem has no relationship, Hashem has no dependencies, Hashem has nothing but Hashem. The idea of Meluch, that the Eibishter could be involved with another, is the highest and the deepest thing. It's not the shallowest and the most superficial. Because it's only on the deepest levels where part of the Eibishter's Shleimus is that there should be another of whom he has a relationship. And the same is true in a human being. We are selfish creatures. That's what we are. The Eibishter made us selfish. And I don't only mean selfish in the hedonistic sense. Like I said before, we're all chazedim, yeah. Selfish means our perspective on the whole world is a reflection of us. My relationship with every other person I'm involved with has to do with my personality and my tendencies. Like I said before, whenever you have a relationship with another based on closeness, that relationship is based on how you feel, how I feel about you. It's a kiruv. Yeah. The idea that we have a relationship with another, which is not at all about us. I have a relationship with another person. That relationship has nothing to do with not my personality, not my desire, not my tendencies, and not my interests, and not my needs. But it's entirely the other person. This is Midas HaMalchus. A king, his whole Metzias is the Am. It's so weird, right? This famous quotation of the Rebbetzin, which the Rebbe repeated by Fabrengen, that the Rebbetzin said, my father belonged to the Chassidim. And the Rebbe said that this was the decisive quote that the judge used to understand what Chassidus is. It's not a Gleichwertel, it's not just a cute quote, it's the Pnimius Hadova. You make a king. When you make a king, you give him all the power in the world. But you take away from him his private identity. A king is called Libon Shal Kol Yisrael. The king is the heart of the nation, and he belongs to them. It's Melech Peiris Geder. A king can make himself a road anywhere, anyway, how wide he wants. Nobody can tell him you can't break through my property to build a road. He has to pay for the property, but he can make the road any place he wants. Kings can do almost anything. And they belong to the subjects. There's no private by a melech. There's no such thing as private and public. His Metzias is that he's the property of the people. Just like the Rebbetzin said, my father belonged to the Chassidim. That's a melech. So think about it in psychology, yeah? Our relationships are based on us. And here is a relationship which is not at all based on the king, it's based entirely on the subjects. Think about it. So Chassidus says that this Rema must be a relationship. Pardon me. Thank you. Which is the deepest, which is what? Involvement with another based on distance in the Melech. It's the deepest thing in the Melech. The deepest inyan in the Melech is that he can become somebody else's. So Taka Malchus is the lowest midah. It's the lowest midah. In the terms of Seder Shach, it's the lowest midah. And it's the deepest midah. If you wanted to say it in Haskalah Isis, you would say that a Melech is something that's not the Melech becomes the Melech. Something completely separate becomes connected. So just to continue this cloud that we established, that Nehi is lower than Chagas, but has a higher Shadish. Chagas is lower than Chabad and has a higher Shadish. It's true of Malchus. Malchus is the lowest midah, has the highest source. This is my first point. What's my second point? And this I really want to talk about, because so far I've neglected to talk about this, and it's very important. Malchus, on a practical level, is Kabbalah Sil. The practical side of Malchus is Kabbalah Sil. right? The emotional side of Malchus is to be involved with another from a distance. Or in other words, to be involved with another based entirely on that other. That has nothing to do with me. Just as that other is. The practical side of Malchus is to do without zero motivation. That's what Kabbalah Sel means. To do what the Eibishter says without any motivation whatsoever. And Chassidus connects the two. What's the connection? Because since Malchus is an emotion of separation, within oneself, the emotion of separation separates the pnimius of the person from the chitzenius of the person. For the Kabbalists keeping score at home, the yam from the yabosha, the land from the sea. Malchus is called sea and Malchus is called land. You know why the land is dry? Because all the water is in the ocean. You know why near the ocean the sand is very dry? Because the water is sucked into the ocean. The water draws all the moisture into itself, so around it is very, very, very dry. And in the Nimshal, the pnimius of Malchus, the reimus of Malchus, the idea of Malchus emotionally being removed leaves over a chitzonius without any emotion. Zero emotion. Just a relationship. Just a practical relationship. Now, Kabbalah Sel is very, very important. And it's very important that we talk about it. And it's very important that we talk about it correctly. There's a number of people who come over to me and criticize me about ways I've explained Kabbalah Sel. And they were right. They were really right. So I guess this is part of what I'm talking about, tshuva. A bit of a correction. I want to give you a word from the Rebbe. The Rebbe had a steig gekocht in Kabbalah Sel. The Rebbe was very, very into Kabbalah Sel. The Rebbe frequently would tell people that in their Avedas Hashem they should learn the first 10 or 15 lines of Perek Memalef and Tanya. When I first got married, I was a young know-it-all. I gave a shiur to Israelis in the very beginning of my life as a teacher. There was a woman in that class, all the ladies were older than I was. I was a boy chick, I was 26, 20, how old was I? I was less than 30. And some of the people who came to this class were very choshev people. Shluchim and Lamdes and Mechanches. So the woman sent me a note, I still have it in my Tanya. Can I please explain the avodah of Kabbalah Sel? The whole thing is 3 lines. Because the Rebbe told me in Yechidus that I have to serve the Eibush, the base was written in Tanya Perek Memalef. This woman is much older than I, and she's much more of a chassid than I'll ever be. And she has 1,000 times more Kabbalah Sel. I should explain to her Kabbalah Sel. Anyway, I got so close to explaining Kabbalah Sel that I saved her note. I'm going to teach her Kabbalah Sel. Ridiculous. I should look in the mirror. But the Rebbe sich stark gekocht, meinig gekocht. He told people, Kabbalah Sel, they used to be from Samach Vav, the whole idea of Avedas Eved, or Mikna Rav, Avedas Eved. And I want to share with you a word that the Rebbe told somebody, that a Yid wrote to the Rebbe, that he's not succeeding in the Yom of Avedas Hashem. He's failing in whatever his challenges are. And the Rebbe wrote to him, you tried every method. Why not try Kabbalah Sel? You tried every other trick as Nishga Gangen. Try Kabbalah Sel. Now you have to think about Kabbalah Sel. What does Kabbalah Sel mean? Kabbalah Sel, I always tell you the same story. Mrs. Talashevsky is Marchion B'Shalom, like your Shved, yeah? His name was Ramotcha Talashevsky, Motl Talashevsky. He was older than the Rebbe, right? Yeah? So Simcha said in the Mems, he was an old man. During HaKofes, the Rebbe turned to him and said, that they should make a somersault. So he said to the Rebbe, Favos. He was an old man, he was in his 80s. Why? And the Rebbe answered him, Valiches. Because I told you to. He did what he was told. The Rebbe told him to make a somersault, a tumble sault. So he asked the Rebbe, why? He said, I told you to. So he did it. That's Kabbalah Sel. Kabbalah Sel means the Eibishter tells and we listen. That's the whole story. The head of Kabbalah Sel is his nitokin favos. Kabbalah Sel means I don't need a motivation. Human nature is if you're going to do something you need a reason. Human nature is if you're going to do something you need a motivation. You have to have a tam. Tam doesn't only mean a reason. Tam means a geschmack. Tam means a feel. The spirit of what you're doing. Kabbalah Sel means there is no spirit. There is something, I have to do it, and I do it. So of course we all know the quote from Friedrich Rebbe. The Friedrich Rebbe says in the Siches, A Yid is a Kabbalah Selnik is a Yid. A Jew has Kabbalah Sel is Jewish. Kabbalah Sel is the simplest avodah. You know why it's simple? You don't have to have a mind, you don't have to have heart, you don't have to have senses, you have to just do what you're told. But it's the deepest avodah. Because why should I do what you're saying? Why should I do what you said? You want to do something, do it yourself. You have your reasons. I don't have your reasons. At the base of Kabbalah Sale is the deepest level of, even though this is not my interest, but it's your interest, it's the Eibishter's Ratzon, and because the Eibishter wants, I do what the Eibishter wants. Right? And the Lashon of Pirkei Avos, Batel Ritzeincha Mipnei Ritzeinei. You want to do one thing, the Eibishter wants you to do another, and you do what the Eibishter wants, and you don't do what you want. Not because of Avas Hashem, because you love the Eibishter, or Yiras Hashem, you're afraid of the Eibishter, but simply because he said. So the Rebbe wrote to this person, you're trying to fight with the Yetzer Hara, and you're not doing very well. Try Kabbalah, try just doing it because the Eibishter said. What's my motivation? The motivation is that the Eibishter geheist, that the Eibishter said. So of course this is a very sensitive thing, because al pi seichel it's impossible. Logically it doesn't make sense. Logically, if I do something you want, I need a reason. The whole principle of Kabbalah Sel means I do what you want and I absolutely don't have a reason other than that you told me. So when you learn about it, Chassidus, my mother Chassidus struggle with it. What's the logic of Kabbalah Sel? What's the logic of Yidden? And the answer is, the logic of Kabbalah Sel is bittul. The logic of Kabbalah Sel is bittul. What does bittul mean? Bittul means that I put Hashem before myself. That's what it means. Why do I put Hashem before myself? Because in my essence, in my very, very essence, I know that the truth of me is Hashem. Right? I'm a selfish creature. Until what level? Yeah? I'm a selfish creature until what level that there's no more I. So long as there's an I, there is a self. And as long as there's a self, there's a selfish. Yeah, hopefully he's fresh and doesn't stink, yeah. That's a pun to put in a special freezer, yeah. But there's a point at which there's no longer an I. Why no longer an I? Because we're part of the universe, part of the cosmos, part of the Eibishter. And the point that there's no I, there's no self, and there can be no selfish, yes. That point is the place where the Yid is one with the Lakus. But that point, where a Yid is one with the Lakus, is called Nechsidus, a built-in Metzias. It doesn't have a form. The place at which our Metzias is one with the Eibishter's Metzias, and Nishtaken Ich, there's no I, there's no self, and there's no selfish, is a point which is as plain and as formless and as not real as the Eibishter himself. So Chassidus says, the Frierdiker Rebbe writes, a Yid has a capacity for Kabbalah Sel. A Yid is a Kabbalah Sel, and a Kabbalah Sel, that means that the level of a Yiddish neshama, which is so one with Hashem, where you can no longer say I, and you can no longer say self, a Jew is in touch with that level in his neshama, and he can operate from that level. So when the Eibishter says do something, and the Jew says why, and the Eibishter answers Valecheth, because I told you to, Nasav and Ishma, and the Yid listens, he is expressing that self. And that's the other side of the coin of Malchus. The one side of the coin of Malchus is the Midas HaReimamus, is the emotion of distance. And the other side of the coin of Malchus is the emotionlessness of acceptance. I don't have to have a personal feeling, a personal opinion, a personal tendency to do what the Eibishter said, because I'm in touch with the place within me, with me and the Eibishter are one and the same. And there's nothing simple about that. Kabbalah Sel is, I should say differently, there's nothing easy about that. Kabbalah Sel is very simple, but Kabbalah is very serious. When you want to fight with the Yetzer Hara, one of the ways of fighting with the Yetzer Hara is to be Makabel Leil Malchus Shamayim, to accept the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. I'm going to tell you a story, but it's only a Hakdama. It's only a Hakdama. What's the story? It's a Moedin de Kamais. I know a Jew, so a Malach Yov Hashanam Zayin, who's a hard worker and very disciplined, very a mahus, nicht gepashter Mensch, who told me the following. He was working in a certain business, and his boss was fired. His boss was fired because his boss was corrupt, and his boss had neglected his department in the business for months. And by the time the company caught on to this corruption, the whole business was suffering because this department was flailing. It was completely out of control. So they didn't give the guy 2 weeks notice. They didn't tell him in a month, find a job. They fired him off and on. Don't come back tomorrow. Because he was corrupt. He was partially corrupt. He was ruining the yeshiva. They came to his subordinate and say, here, this is your job. He wasn't trained. He didn't have the training. And he didn't have time. The business needs to go on. And he has to clean up months and months and months of neglect and ineptitude and failure to perform. So you have to keep the business solvent. Whatever he was part of the billing department. You have to make sure that the bills got paid and that the employees were paid. Can't play around with that, yeah? But at the same time, he has to figure out how to bring the systems that he was involved with into a healthy state, yeah. So he told me, I said to myself, how am I going to do this? I'm not trained for this. I didn't go to school for this. No one ever taught me this. This job fell on me. And I have to do 2 things at once or 3 things at once. So he told me, I sat down and I made myself a daily schedule. To the minute. He wrote how many minutes he's dedicating to each task. He had so many hours for building and so many hours for correcting and examining the mistakes in the old systems. And some things on his list he gave 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day, because he had many, many jobs. And I know this person, and I know he's capable of doing this, and I know that I'm incapable of doing this. When my allotted time for a particular task ended, I stopped immediately, in the middle of a word, he told me. He dedicated to a certain task 2 hours. When 2 hours passed, he didn't say 5 more minutes, he didn't give it 5 more seconds. He put the pencil down and went on to the next thing. He came back with the next thing. He said in 3 months, his head was above the water. 3 months. Pashat discipline. You know and I know how hard that is. Because most people say, okay, 5 more minutes. But there's no such thing as 5 more minutes. If he was going to solve this problem, he had to give time to each thing. He couldn't let certain things flounder because he didn't enjoy them or because they were not that important, had to deal with everything. And he survived Pasha by disciplining himself. But there's one nekuda in this mashal which you don't have in the nimshal. What nekuda do you have in this mashal that you don't have in this nimshal? He disciplined himself. Disciplining oneself is a moedin de kamaylim. And it's a madrega bitl. In order to be that disciplined, you have to have unbelievable control over your emotions and over your tendencies, over things that you like and dislike. Because the way it works in the real world is, things that you like, you're spending too much time on. The things that you don't like, you don't spend enough time on. And you can't do that. But in the end, he disciplined himself. Now imagine keeping such a schedule to the minute, because somebody else gave him that schedule. That discipline is more difficult, number one, and it's more successful because since there is a greater measure of bittul, because the bittul is superimposed from outside, that discipline makes you, it transforms you into a whole being. Now add a third dimension, that the one who gives you the discipline is the Eibishter. Meaning to say, the one who's giving this business, not another person. Because if another person gives you a discipline, he has a reason. When you discipline yourself, when you make for yourself a schedule, how you're going to behave, you know why you allotted 2 hours in the morning to this task, and 5 minutes in the afternoon to that task, and 20 minutes later in the day to another task. You know why. So the discipline is based on a tam. The tam doesn't increase the discipline. It limits the discipline. When somebody else disciplines you, you're accepting their judgment. But at least you know they have a reason. When the Eibishter disciplines you, ain't time no rachs. You have to know why. There isn't a why. So Chassidus says that the lowest thing a person can do has the deepest shadish in the neshama. That's the chap. The idea that I accept the Eibishter's discipline strictly on the basis of discipline. There's no regesh whatsoever. There's no emotion. And I don't even know if the Eibishter has a tam. I don't know why the Eibishter wants this. Verkehrt, not only I don't know why. I know that by the Eibishter there doesn't have to be a why. Doesn't have to make sense. Doesn't have to be right in any kind of judgment. This is His will. So when a person is able to accept the will of the Eibishter, based on the fact that He commanded us to do so, and we accept, that's the most empty act in terms of meaning. There's no understanding, there's no feeling, there's no experience, there's no chayes. But it's the most wholesome act in terms of giving of yourself to the Eibishter. So it's the lowest level of the spirit of the person. And it expresses the deepest inside of the person. This is the ultimate illustration of the lowest thing having the highest source. You know how low it is? There's no oil at all. There's no geschmack, there's no understanding, there's no feeling, there's no nothing. There's just an acceptance. Why do I do it? Because the Eibishter said. Why am I doing what the Eibishter said if I want something different? Because in me there's a place where the Eibishter and me are one. But the place where the Eibishter and me are one, it's not like me and him have conversations and understand each other and bring with one another. There isn't an I, and therefore there isn't a self, and therefore there isn't the selfish. That's the basis for Kabbalah. So by Malchus it's also true that it's the lowest midah, it's the lowest sfira, and has the deepest shadish. It's true in Pnimius HaMalchus. The whole idea of Reimamus. The whole idea of Reimamus means that the Fayachal, the Eibish, as he is in himself, is connected to something completely outside of himself. This is the deepest idea in Elokus. And the Chitzenius of Malchus is Bittul and Kabbalah. Now last week, when you were here, I advertised that the topic of today was going to be Chushim. And I didn't even touch it. So this week, Chushim, the senses. Remember I told you I was seeing here, yeah? Because between the class that I gave last week and the appearance of Bechibik Yitrach, that I want to talk about it. So I'm advertising again that the next Sunday we'll talk about Chushim. I'm not going to come up with something else to talk about between now and then, and we'll talk about it.
With the other midas that you spoke about, like you, as a human, like there was some relating to it in terms of a feeling. If you're talking about these are feelings. So with this, the way we can relate to it is Kabbalah. Because when you're talking about kingship, I was like, how does this apply to me? But
that's what a king is. He tells you what to do.
Right. So
and there's no why.
So in terms of us and our relationship, it's really the Kabbalah. Because I mean, this is the part of it that relates to us.
Right. Very much so. Yeah. Not easy. Not easy at all. And then the Rebbe comes along and says, have Simchin Kabbalah. How do you do that? How do you have Simchin Kabbalah?